B.A. Courson, The Man Behind the Badge, by K. Brad Farfield. Tomorrow evening at 7 p.m., we begin a special series on one of Ashley County's most talked about and unforgettable figures, Bunyan Aubrey, B.A. Courson. Over the years, so many of you have asked about the real man behind the name, the sheriff, the war survivor, the neighbor, the family man. Thanks to a generous visit with Paul Courson, B.A.'s son, and Ovid T. Switcher, Jr., longtime keeper of our county's history, we now have access to documents, photographs, and memories that bring B.A.'s story into sharper focus than ever before. Paul was only 9 years old when he lost his father, and he admits there's a lot about B.A.'s life that remains a mystery, even to the family. But yesterday afternoon, we were able to spend several hours with Paul, reviewing old documents, sharing stories, and capturing images that have never before been published. We are deeply grateful to both Paul and Ovid for making this series possible. Over the next week, starting tomorrow at 7 p.m. and continuing each night, we'll release a new chapter in the life of B.A. Courson. On Friday, we'll close out the series with several posts throughout the day, including essays, photos, and likely a few video stories as well. Every post will be linked in the comments below for easy reading and sharing, so you can catch up on any parts you miss or share your favorite stories with others. If you have memories, photos, or stories about B.A. Courson, please jump in the comments or send us a direct message. Your stories matter. They fill in the gaps, correct the record, and help all of Ashley County remember not just a sheriff, but a neighbor and a man whose life touched so many. What to expect in this series? A farm boy from Hamburg, B.A. Courson's beginnings, cotton fields, family pride, and a restless spirit that led him from the Arkansas Delta to the wider world. Manila's own regiment. A young Arkansan joins the U.S. Army's 31st Infantry, stationed in the Philippines on the eve of World War II. The calm before the storm. Death March in Darkness. The fall of Bataan, the infamous Death March, and the first taste of POW life, where every day was a test of endurance. From hell ship to steel mill. Transported across the sea on a Japanese hell ship, B.A. endures forced labor and Osaka steel mills. Survival becomes a daily act of willpower. Sheriff of the segregated South. Returning home, B.A. becomes Ashley County Sheriff, navigating the complexities and challenges of Jim Crow-era Arkansas and earning respect across the community divide. The Final Watch. New Year's Eve, 1969. A tragic car crash brings B.A.'s life to a sudden end. Rumors swirl, but his reputation for fairness and courage endures. Memory, myth, and the man. A look back at the legend, the man, and what it means to keep history alive in a small community. This is your invitation to add to the story. All essays will be linked in the comments of this post for easy access. We invite you to follow along, add your memories, and help us honor a life that left a lasting mark on Ashley County. A Farm Boy from Hamburg by K. Brad Barfield. Bunyan Aubrey B.A. Courson, Jr. was born on April 1st, 1919, in the farm country just outside Hamburg, Arkansas. His story begins where pouting rows meet pine timber, and long days of hard work were the only guarantee. Ashley County in those days was a place of large families, shared struggle, and the kind of practical wisdom that comes from getting by with little.
For the Courson family, the Great Depression wasn't just a headline, it was a daily lesson in resilience. B.A. was one of several children born to Bunyan Aubrey Courson Sr. and Bertha Richards Courson. The household was busy, stubborn, and proud. Sisters played basketball at Promised Land and Monticello A&M, earning their place in local legend, while the boys worked fields and learned to handle themselves on the land and in a scrap. In the late 1920s and early 30s, with cotton prices collapsing and jobs scarce, schools sometimes took a back seat to the realities of keeping food on the table. B.A. did his share in both the classroom and the fields, but he was restless, a quality that would shape his life. He made it as far as the 10th grade at Hamburg High School, suiting up for football before a run-in with the coach or falling out sent him home for good. His father, not one to mince words, told B.A. he could work the cotton fields if he wasn't going to school. After a heated argument said to involve a mule left untied at lunch, B.A. made up his mind. He turned to his mother and declared, "I'm going so far away from Ashley County, it's going to take a $10 bill just to get me a penny postcard." He meant it, too. By his late teens, B.A. was working for the Crossett paper mill, but the hum of the machinery wasn't enough to quiet his restlessness. In February 1941, with war rumbling overseas and jobs still hard to come by, he enlisted in the regular army. He wasn't drafted, he volunteered, seeking something bigger than Ashley County's horizon. It was a decision born of equal parts frustration, hope, and a young man's hunger to prove himself. For B.A., the Army offered escape, adventure, and the order that life on a Depression-era farm could never promise. He'd be shipped to Manila, joining the 31st Infantry Regiment, Manila's own. He was still barely more than a boy, but he carried with him the stubborn streak of a Courson and the unbreakable habits of rural Arkansas. Before he was a survivor of the Bataan Death March, a POW, or a respected sheriff, B.A. Courson was simply a farm boy from Hamburg, barefoot in the fields, quick with a laugh, and never willing to let anyone else write his story for him. His journey would carry him halfway around the world and back again, forging a legacy of grit and service that Ashley County still remembers.
Manila's Own Regiment by K. Brad Barfield. When B.A. Courson shipped out for the Army, he left Arkansas with more grit than fanfare. A country boy sent to the other side of the world just as the world itself was about to split apart. Assigned to the Anti-Tank Company, 31st Infantry Regiment, he became one of the Polar Bears, an elite professional unit permanently stationed in the Philippines as the backbone of the U.S. Army's Philippine Division. Unlike draftees who would follow later, B.A. and his fellow regulars were already on the front lines when the war came roaring to their door. The Philippines in late 1941 was a place of heat, humidity, and tension you could taste in the air. American soldiers drilled alongside Filipino troops, preparing for an attack that seemed inevitable after years of rising tension across the Pacific. The Army was stretched thin. General MacArthur had rushed to build up a defense, but the 31st Infantry, Courson's unit, was undermanned. Their best officers sent off to train raw recruits in the new Philippine Army. For B.A., it was an uneasy peace, training under the palm trees, learning the lay of the land, and watching the city of Manila pulse with rumors and radio broadcasts from abroad. The equipment they were given was proof of how far-flung and forgotten the American garrison had become.
6 anti-tank guns for the whole company, half of them left over from the First World War. Their rifles and helmets were relics, their vehicles battered and unreliable. On December 8, 1941, just hours after Pearl Harbor, the Japanese struck. The sky filled with bombers. American planes were destroyed on the ground, and chaos took hold. The 31st Infantry, including Courson's anti-tank company, was ordered north and west to buy time for a desperate retreat onto the Bataan Peninsula. For weeks, they fought a series of running battles and rear-guard actions, trying to slow the Japanese advance long enough for other Americans and Filipino soldiers to escape. The terrain was jungle, swamp, and river, alien to a farm boy from Ashley County, but B.A. adapted quickly. He learned to march through mud, dig in under bombardment, and go without sleep for days on end. The food ran short. Ammunition ran out. Still, the order was to hold. In early January, the 31st Infantry made their stand at Layak Junction, a battered crossroads at the gateway to Bataan. Here, B.A. and his comrades faced tanks with antique guns, holding back the enemy just long enough for the rest of the force to fall back. By the time they withdrew, they had paid dearly in blood, but the defense held for a while. The regulars of Manila's own, B.A. among them, became the battling bastards of Bataan, isolated and abandoned, but still fighting with everything they had. They sang a bitter refrain: no mama, no papa, no Uncle Sam, no aunts, no uncles, no nieces, no nephews, no rifles, no planes, or artillery pieces. For B.A. Courson, the months ahead would be defined by endurance. He had crossed an ocean to serve with pride. Now, cut off from home, he and his brothers in arms would be asked to hold a line with their backs to the sea. The siege had begun, and the real test was still to come. Death March and Darkness by K. Brad Barfield. The last stand on Bataan ended not in glory, but in exhaustion. By April 1942, B.A. Courson and his fellow soldiers, sick, starving, and out of options, were ordered to lay down their arms. The surrender was a heartbreak that would echo for a lifetime. But for B.A. and the thousands beside him, the true ordeal was just beginning. The Japanese rounded up their prisoners and forced them onto the infamous Bataan Death March, a 65-mile journey through jungle heat and utter lawlessness. B.A., once a farm boy from Ashley County, was now one among tens of thousands, stripped of dignity and thrust into a world where survival meant everything. The conditions defied belief: no food, almost no water, and guards who saw mercy as weakness. Men who stumbled or asked for rest were beaten, bayoneted, or simply left where they fell. Kind-hearted Filipino civilians tried to sneak water or food to the Americans and Filipinos marching past. Many were killed for their trouble. Every step was a test of endurance. Those who made it to the camps arrived as shadows of themselves. The first stop was Camp O'Donnell, a place where death seemed as common as sleep. Dysentery, malaria, starvation, these did as much damage as bullets ever could. Men who witnessed men dying by the dozens every day, sometimes from wounds, sometimes from thirst, often from hope lost. From O'Donnell, survivors like B.A. were sent to Cabanatuan, another camp where the only certainty was hardship. Here, forced labor replaced forced marches. The days bled together. Roll calls, brutal work details, the constant presence of guards. Yet in the bleakness, men clung to tiny comforts, a letter from home, a memory of family, a whispered prayer. B.A. did what so many Arkansas boys had learned on the farm. He endured. He kept moving. In rare letters home, he spoke in code, reminding his mother to care for his coon dog, so she'd know it was truly him writing. He watched friends die, but he held on. The trauma was lasting. The scars, both visible and hidden, would never fully fade. But B.A. Courson survived, carried by the same stubborn resolve that had driven him to leave Ashley County in search of something greater. His journey through darkness was not just about endurance, but about the refusal to let cruelty define his fate. B.A. Courson was now a survivor of one of World War II's most infamous atrocities, but the road ahead would demand even more, as new orders would soon take him far from Philippine soil, across the open ocean, into new dangers and deeper tests of spirit.
From hell ship to steel mill. From surviving the Baton death march and months of disease and starvation in the camps would have been enough to break almost anyone. But for B.A. Courson, the war's cruelty was just shifting to a new, more harrowing phase. By late 1944, as Allied forces began retaking the Philippines, the Japanese made a fateful decision to ship their remaining prisoners, those who could still stand, to the Japanese mainland. Their transport would become another chapter in wartime infamy, the Hell ships. B.A. was loaded with hundreds of other American and Filipino POWs into the hold of an unmarked cargo ship packed so tightly that the men could hardly sit, much less lie down. With little water, almost no food, and air thick with sickness and fear, the days in the dark became a nightmare. The Japanese ships were legitimate targets for American submarines and aircraft. Allied crews couldn't know that their own countrymen suffered below decks. Death could come from disease, thirst, suffocation, or a torpedo. Many never survived the crossing. For B.A., luck and resilience were enough to deliver him to the next ordeal, imprisonment in Osaka, Japan. Here he became a number, 314, stripped of any last illusion of dignity. Like so many other POWs, he was forced into slave labor for the Mitsubishi steel mills. The days were long and merciless, the work dangerous. Malnutrition, disease, and beatings were part of daily life, and the winters bit hard against men who had nothing left but their determination to endure. The Japanese guards were unpredictable. Some were cruel, others simply indifferent. American POWs learned to rely on each other, forming bonds that would last for the rest of their lives. Small acts of kindness, a smuggled crust of bread, a shared memory of Arkansas, helped keep hope alive. B.A. kept going. He carried the memories of Ashley County in his heart, the wide fields at sunrise, his mother's letters, the promise of home. He survived years in a world stripped of mercy, knowing that every day survived was a day closer to freedom. At last, in August 1945, the war ended. American POWs in Japan awoke one morning to find their captors vanished. The steel mill, once an engine of suffering, became the setting for liberation. B.A. Courson, prisoner, survivor, Arkansan, was finally free. But the scars, both physical and invisible, would travel home with him. His journey through hell had changed him forever, yet his story, rooted in Ashley County, tested on battlefields and in prison camps, would soon return to the place where it began and shape a new chapter in the life of a survivor who refused to be broken. Sheriff of the Segregated South.
by K. Brad Barfield. When B.A. Courson came home from war, Ashley County was eager to welcome back one of its own, a survivor of the Baton Death March, a former prisoner in the shadow of Mitsubishi steel mills, and now a living emblem of grit. But reintegration was no easy task. The scars B.A. carried weren't just physical. Nightmares haunted his sleep. Long silences lingered in his eyes. Like so many returning veterans, he faced a world that had changed, even as it stayed eerily familiar. But B.A. didn't turn inward. He turned to public service, swapping a soldier's uniform for the badge of the law. In 1946, Ashley County elected him sheriff, a position he would hold for more than 2 decades, interrupted briefly when he tried his hand at private contracting. In that time, B.A. became one of the most recognized figures in local law enforcement, known not just for his war record, but for his steady, unflinching presence. The South he policed was still deeply segregated. Jim Crow laws and the traditions of a divided past shaped every courthouse, classroom, and ballot box. It would have been easy, expected even, for a white sheriff to rule with an iron fist, propping up the old order. But stories told in black and white communities alike remember something different about Sheriff Courson. He was fair. He listened. In election after election, black voters who faced their own daily battles for respect and rights turned out in numbers for him, believing he would treat them with the dignity denied by so many others. B.A. was no saint. He was a product of his time. But the same sense of order and justice that carried him through captivity drove him to seek fairness at home. He investigated crimes without regard for race or status. When tempers flared or old wounds opened, his reputation for straight talk and even-handedness was often enough to calm the waters. Ashley County in those years faced its share of trouble: moonshine raids, local feuds, the occasional bank robbery or tragedy on the highways. Through it all, B.A. kept a steady hand. He believed in the law, not as a weapon, but as a shield for the vulnerable, a boundary for the powerful, and a guide for a changing community. For a generation of Ashley County residents, the image of Sheriff Courson, broad-shouldered, uniform-pressed, hat cocked just so, became a symbol of order in an unruly era. He was proof that history's hardest lessons could be survived, and that sometimes those who had suffered most could become the guardians of justice for all. The Final Watch by K. Brad Barfield. The night of December 31, 1969 arrived in Ashley County with a hush and a chill, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and settles over the land. For Sheriff B.A. Courson, it was another night on duty, a final patrol to end the year, just as he'd done for decades. He drove his patrol car south on State Highway 81, 4 miles north of Hamburg, not knowing that his long march of service was nearly at its end. At about 11:30 p.m., something went wrong. Witnesses would later say they saw a red car flying down the highway, pursued by a white patrol car. The official record states that Courson's 1969 Chevrolet left the road, floated over a 6-foot ditch, and then careened across the pavement before striking a 16-inch pine tree. The impact was catastrophic. The car was torn apart from bumper to seat. B.A. Courson, survivor of the Baton Death March, sheriff for over 2 decades, was pinned against the tree, gone before help could arrive. In the days that followed, rumors spun through Ashley County. Some whispered that another officer's car had been chasing someone that night. Others suggested there was more to the crash than a simple accident. But the official story remained. Courson died in the line of duty, his life ending on the same roads he'd spent years protecting. The loss was profound. B.A. Courson had served as sheriff for over 20 years, interrupted only briefly by a stint in private business. No major crime had gone unsolved during his watch, a record he attributed to the trust and cooperation of friends across Ashley County and beyond. When he died, a community mourned. Tributes poured in, not just from white families, but from the black voters who had helped keep him in office. His funeral filled the First Baptist Church in Hamburg. The Arkansas Sheriff's Association and fellow officers from across the state gathered to pay their respects. He was buried at Promised Land Cemetery, among generations of Coursons who had called Ashley County home. His death closed a chapter not only for his family, but for the entire community. The farm boy who had survived war and captivity, who had kept order in tumultuous times, was gone. Yet the echoes of his steady hand and unwavering sense of duty lingered, etched in local memory, and in the stories told on porches and courthouse steps for years to come.
Memory, Myth, and the Man by K. Brad Barfield. Every county has its legends, names that linger long after the last newsprint yellows and the last badge is polished and put away. For Ashley County, B.A. Courson is one of those names. But when the facts fade and the rumors rise, what remains? Who was the real B.A. Courson? War hero, lawman, survivor, or simply a man making his way through history's hardest times? His story is told in fragments, a battered photograph, a letter home from across the sea, a courthouse anecdote passed from one old-timer to the next. To some, he was the barefoot farm boy who went further than anyone ever thought possible. To others, he was the sheriff who brought order without prejudice, whose handshake could calm a feud or earn a vote from a neighbor on the other side of the tracks. For his family, he was flesh and blood, a son, a father, a brother, changed forever by things he saw but rarely spoke of. Yet behind every myth, there is a man. B.A. carried burdens that could not be seen, a mind scarred by the Bataan Death March, the horror of POW camps, and years spent wondering if order and justice could ever exist in a world that had shown him so much cruelty. At home, those wounds sometimes surfaced in silence, restlessness, or in the long hours he worked to keep busy. Like many of his generation, he rarely spoke of what he had endured, leaving others to guess at the cost. Still, the community remembered him with respect. Black and white, rich and poor, townspeople and farmers alike, he crossed divides that seemed imbridgeable, not by ignoring the past, but by insisting on fairness in the present. His legacy lives in the people he helped, the order he kept, and the high expectations he set for what a public servant could be. As the years pass, it becomes harder to separate the facts from the folklore. Maybe that's how it's meant to be. Every county needs its stories, and every story needs its keeper. In the end, B.A. Courson's life is a reminder that real history is never neat. It is built from grit, pain, mercy, and contradiction, a patchwork of memory and myth that shapes who we are and who we hope to become. To remember B.A. Courson is to remember that resilience comes in many forms, that service leaves marks seen and unseen, and that the greatest legacy may be the questions we leave for those who come after.